Welcome boys and girls, Cosine here with my Immortal Empires DLC tier list for Total War Warhammer 3. Now that Creative Assembly has made the sandbox far more widely available. What makes a DLC good? What makes it bad? Well, it has to do with the campaigns, whether or not they're great, the legendary lords, if they are cool, if they are great in battle, if they're worth confederating, the units, regiments, renown, generic lords, heroes, legendary heroes. And I'll start with the best DLC in not just Warhammer 3 or the Warhammer games, but in Total War history. I would say only Fall of the Samurai ends up being a better DLC, but that's a full-blown expansion by Creative Assembly. Thrones of Decay, as a whole, has great campaigns for all the races, so not just Malachi. But when you look at Elspeth, when you look at Tamarkan, they're both great campaigns alongside Malachi. Well, Elspeth is the discussion of which is the best Empire campaign between her, Gelt, and Karl Franz, but still, a pretty good campaign, great units all around for all of these races. Even if the Slayers are not necessarily so useful for Malachi, they are useful for a Slayer playstyle if you want to make it work. And then, of course, Grudge Rakers, Regiments Renown, etc. So on every level, Thrones of Decay delivers. Great units, great campaigns, great mechanics that were added for those campaigns. It just works. So if you're going to buy any DLC for Warhammer 3 or for Immortal Empires, I would certainly recommend Thrones of Decay as a package in its entirety. Depends on, of course, what you want to play of the races in Thrones of Decay, but it is very much worth it. One DLC that isn't worth it is the Grim and the Grave. Volkmar and Gorst have very outdated campaigns. Certainly Gorst is very powerful, but the content that is available is not great. The only value proposition with the Grim and the Grave is getting corpse cards and Regiments Renown for the Vampire Counts. On the Empire side, Regiments Renown, of course, Archlectors and Knights of the Blazing Sun. But is this DLC important whatsoever for an Empire campaign? Not so much. It does add certain things that are useful, but it is not really a DLC worth purchasing to really enjoy an Empire campaign. It's not really even that worth to purchase for a Vampire Counts campaign because, yes, Mortis Engines, Corpse Cards are useful for the Vampire Counts, but you kinda don't need them. Though it is the only DLC for the Vampire Count, so there is a valid proposition from that perspective, at least until Neferata comes out. Then we have the King of the Warlord DLC. This one's a mixed bag. On the Greenskin side, Skarsnik has a very unique and interesting campaign after the Omens of Destruction Greenskin rework. So he does play very differently than other Greenskins. His campaign does work. It's dynamic, it's fun, it's interesting. Unit-wise, not so much. Regiments of Renown, though, obviously always useful, always good to have. On the Dwarf side, Belagar, playing his campaign is not necessarily worth it all that much, though he is worth confederating. So there is a difference between playing a campaign of a legendary lord and confederating that legendary lord. Skarsnik is not so much worth confederating, he is worth playing, however. Belagar, not so worth to play because of the upkeep situation and dynamics of the campaign, but very worth it to confederate. And then you do get various useful things. Regiments Renown, Rune Lords, Rangers, Bugman's Rangers, especially. So, mixed bag of a DLC. Offers some good units and generic stuff for the Dwarves. Offers a good campaign for the Greenskins. But again, a mixed bag of a DLC. Then we have Call of the Beastmen. Absolutely not worth it. From a unit perspective, you can get access to the entire unit roster of the Beastmen with the Silence and the Fury DLC. So all you're really getting in this campaign is being able to play the various Legendary Lord campaigns of the Beastmen, which aren't particularly great, even if we ignore the fact that Tarax is out there and he's part of a much better DLC. And he does have the best campaign as well as additional stuff in that DLC. So Call of the Beastmen, not worth it whatsoever. Then we have Realm of the Wood Elves. I'm going to put that in D tier. With Realm of the Wood Elves, it's similar to the Beastmen situation. The units are available for another DLC, and that DLC, Twisted and Twilight, is worth it more. But on the flip side, Orion, Durfu, and Draika are only available if you purchase this DLC. Are those the best campaigns in the world? Not so much, but they're definitely unique compared to what we get in Twisted and Twilight. Next up, we have the Warriors of Chaos DLC that came alongside Warhammer 1. It was the pre-order bonus of Warhammer 1. This one I'm going to say is D tier, at the moment at least. The only value proposition of this DLC is getting access to the campaigns of Sigvald, Archaon, and Kolic, and being able to confederate them as Be'lakor. But outside of that, not necessarily that much value to this DLC, though I would say the campaigns here are actually better than the Champions of Chaos DLC, to be sure. And if Be'lakor wasn't widely available, and he is, though I'm not sure with the current state of Immortal Empires, I'll probably have to check that out. But since Be'lakor is available, far more widely so, and a better campaign than Archaon, Sigvald, and Kolic, I would definitely say this DLC is not necessarily worth it so much at the moment. Unless you want to have different campaigns than Be'lakor, but again, Be'lakor is the best Warriors of Chaos campaign by far. Then we have Norska, the Norska race pack. So this gives you Wulfric, it gives you Trog. If you're interested in just the Norska race roster, you can just buy Tides of Torment, sale. That gives you access to the roster as well as additional things. But the value proposition of Norska is Wulfric and Trog especially, are far better campaigns than sale. In fact, Trog is one of the better campaigns in the game at the moment. And the nice thing about Trog is you also get access to Wulfric and his unique mechanic of Seafang by just confederating him. So that's kind of one of the best of two worlds in with respect to it, because you aren't just playing one Legendary Lord with Trog, you're kind of playing two at the same time. Yes, there are issues in Norska. That's the reason it's getting B tier. And of course, from a unit, regiment renown, etc., value proposition, it's not really worth it, but it does have one really good campaign. Well, as good of a campaign as you can get with Norska. Then we have Twisted and Twilight. So with Twisted and Twilight, I'm also going to put it in B tier. With Elves, you do get access to an entire roster and extra stuff, so Regiment's Renown, extra units, and the Sisters of Twilight, which are a very good and unique playstyle of the Wood Elves, because they have an entirely different army roster that they can use in their campaigns compared to the others. Because you can still use Glade Guard and ranged infantry and melee infantry in this campaign, but you can also use Hawk Riders in a way that none of the other Wood Elves can do. So that's a unique aspect. Fraught also gives you a very unique Skaven playstyle focused on monsters. I wouldn't say it's the best Skaven campaign in the game, but it is definitely unique, and there's some really cool stuff as part of this DLC as well. So definitely a B tier. Would be higher if Wood Elves played better, but they don't. That is just really the situation with Beastmen, Warriors of Chaos, and Wood Elves when we're thinking about Warhammer 3 at the moment. Next up, we have the Warden and the Paunch DLC for Warhammer 2, or that came alongside Warhammer 2. I think this is one of the bigger tragedies of Warhammer 3, in that this one used to be great when it came out. Alfarian and Grom were very interesting campaigns back in Warhammer 2. The translation between Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3 has certainly not done either of them any favors. They're just outdated campaigns. Alfarian has the problem where getting Warden supplies is just really a level of frustration, and then Grom is simply an outdated campaign where the systems of it, be it the climate situation or even his cauldron, leave a lot to be desired. Now, this DLC is worth getting for the following reasons, beyond Regiment's Renown, of course. You get Administrator Archmages on the High Elven part, and Archmages in general are very useful, Administrator Archmages especially so. On the greenskin side of things, you get Giant River Troll Hacks, which give you casualty replenishment, and Stone Trolls, which are very useful to have. But basically, the campaigns of this DLC are not worth playing. There are, however, certain units, or a hero for the greenskins, a lord for the high elves, that are worth getting. So that is the situation with the Warden and the Paunch DLC. Now, for the Shadow and the Blade DLC, we have the following state of affairs. On one hand, Snitch, Warp Grinders, and various other things that this DLC adds for the Skaven is great. But the Dark Elven side of the DLC, not so much. Malice Darkblade doesn't have a great campaign, and really the only thing that's worth getting from this DLC are the Masters as heroes. So half of it would definitely qualify as an S tier, but the other half of it might as well not exist except for one hero and, of course, Regiment's Renown. So I'm going to put it in C tier. I think that's the fairest judgment I can give on Shadow and Blade. So it's very worth it for Skaven. Same with Twisted and Twilight. Of course, not necessarily so worth it for the Dark Elves. Then Hunter and the Beast, F tier. Without a doubt. Nakai's campaign is not great. The additions to Lizardmen don't matter because Lizardmen themselves are in a bad state as a race, and there's better campaigns for the Lizardmen anyway, and you don't need any bit of content except, Regiment's Renown that are useful from this DLC. What about the Empire stuff? Well, except Regiment's Renown, everything that is part of this DLC is not important for the Empire whatsoever. I mean, I would say Arch-Selectors are actually a much better lore choice than Huntsmen Lords are for the Empire. And besides, Thrones of Decay is just significantly better. So even if you're looking to complete your Empire roster or add to an Empire campaign, this DLC is still not worth it. The campaign isn't worth it, or neither of the campaigns are really worth it. The unit additions, not necessarily so much. Of course, you have Dread Saurians, and hilariously enough, War Wagons, especially with mortars on them, but that's about it for it. Then we have Prophet and Warlock. I'm going to say Prophet and Warlock deserves a B tier, or even maybe a C tier, to some extent. Except, here's the thing. Lizardman-wise, yeah, of course, whatever, right? Definitely Tanowin, F tier, without a doubt. But Skaven-wise, what this DLC does provide, beyond Ikaclaw's campaign, which can work well, assuming you deal with the initial starting position, which is still not great. It has been improved, mainly because of AI changes, so Southern Estalia doesn't get wiped out by Mogre as quickly as it did before. But still, Ikaclaw does suffer. But he does have a very unique and interesting campaign, or the interesting unique campaign mechanics, and the reason I would rank this DLC higher than Shadow and Blade is because Shadow and Blade, yes, it gives you some very powerful units, but what Prophet and Warlock does for the Skaven is it makes a gunpowder playstyle work. You get just Rattling Gunners, Jezzael's Regiments, Renown, and Ikaclaw, but those do matter a fair amount. Of course, you also have Doomflayers and all that, but all the same, just 2 units can make that big of a difference in a campaign. Then we have the Vampire Coast. Don't bother with this DLC. It's not worth it whatsoever. The campaigns aren't worth it. The units of the race itself is not worth playing. virtually no value proposition for this DLC whatsoever. This is the DLC that you get only if you're a completionist in terms of owning every single DLC. Used to be different in Warhammer 2, but we're no longer in Warhammer 2. Then we get the Queen and the Crone DLC. Now, Queen and the Crone, I am going to say it is a C-tier DLC. And that's because, unlike Elfarion and Grom, who actually struggle to play their campaigns, both Alarielle and Hellebrand do have playable campaigns. Frustrating ones, to be certain, but they're at least worth playing, and both Alarielle and Hellebrand are far more powerful than one might think. Furthermore, while the Dark Elves don't necessarily gain very useful things from this DLC, and well, a couple of things, but really, the High Elves get one of the best heroes in the game, flat out, through handmaids, and it's also worth pointing out that if you're playing any High Elven campaign, it is kind of imperative to own this DLC. Far more so than Elfarion. Because yes, not confederating Elfarion does hurt you, but not confederating Alarielle, who's by the way the easiest High Elf to actually confederate in the game, hurts you a lot more. You miss out on her territory, you miss out on handmaids, you miss out on a whole bunch of things. So this DLC is very worth it for the High Elves, more so than Warden and Paunch. And look, at least the campaigns are playable, and they're not terrible, it's just frustrating as opposed to the pain and suffering that you endure playing either Grom or Elfarion at the moment. Then we have the Rise of the Tomb Kings. Yeah, I'm going to put that in D tier. Tomb Kings are not broken or terrible at the moment. They've been improved a bit, but that's the problem with the updates that Creative Assembly made for them. And Lizardmen, which by the way broke the game in October. They didn't go, or even earlier than October. Creative Assembly should have really made both Lizardmen and Tomb Kings far more playable. They could have done so. And it's not about Geomantic Web or anything like that. It was like Books in a Gash, system of Books in a Gash, various things of how the race works. Outside of the aspect of Cetra being cool and Archon, of course, I would say this DLC is now worth it. The campaigns are lackluster, and Tomb Kings don't work well within the dynamic of Warhammer 3's campaign structure. I think this may go up higher once Nagash comes out, hopefully, but at the moment I would say it's not worth it. Then we have the Silence and the Fury DLC. This is definitely worth it if you have any interest whatsoever in playing either Lizardmen or Beastmen. First off, it gives you access to both Beastmen and Lizardmen. It gives you the two best campaigns, or some of the best campaigns for their respective races. It's a bit of a discussion on Lizardmen side of things, but Oxyatl used to be one of the best, if not the best campaign in the game before Thrones of Decay and other developments. Still a pretty solid campaign, and as far as Lizardmen campaigns are. And Tarek's Flyout is the best Beastman campaign. You also get extra units, regiments, renown, etc. So this is a really good DLC from a value proposition. Two of the best campaigns of their respective races, or the best campaign for the Beastmen, one of the better campaigns, or one of the best campaigns for Lizardmen, as well as a bunch of things that are useful to actually use. So that is my perspective on Silence and Fury. Not an S tier, because it's still Beastmen and Lizardmen, but definitely if those two races worked better in the context of the game right now, this would definitely be an S tier DLC. But they don't, so that drags it down. Then we have Shadows of Change. Yeah, I would say Shadows of Change is certainly better than everything else on this list, Grim the Grave, Call of Beastmen, etc. in F tier, but it's still an F tier DLC. And it's not because of the controversy when Shadows of Change came out. It's looking at what's on offer. We get Astankia, whatever as a campaign. We get Yambo, irrelevant as a campaign. Xiao Ming is far better, far more interesting to play. No one wants to spend an entire campaign in Lustria, and certainly no one wants to spend an entire campaign in Lustria, or the entire mechanic or the entire purpose of the campaign is conquering it, and then you unlock an infinite level of power, and you also have a huge amount. If you're looking for matters of state that Yambo has, Karl Franz is better. Tyrion is better in that respect, by the way, because Tyrion's current mechanic is based on that. So, Yanbo not so much. Astounding not so much, and the Changeling is the worst and least popular campaign in the game. It's a nothing campaign. What about units? Yeah, there's some cool stuff, but not important whatsoever for any of the races that are part of this DLC, except Akshinas and Froststorms, as well as Hag Witches, but that's roughly it. But what about the new hero for Cafe? You mean the hero that you can only recruit at tier 3, by which point your campaign as Cafe in any Cafe campaign is effectively over, which doesn't fix any of the underlying issues and just means you got a mediocre melee ranged hero that's not needed. Yeah, that's the problem with the Cafe part. Tzeentch, irrelevant. And Kislev, yeah, there's some useful things, but not a useful campaign. So, yeah, definitely an F tier DLC. Then we got Forge of the Cast Dwarves. Now, I'm of two minds on this. On one hand, I really like a lot of the design of Cast Dwarves, the units, the Legendary Lords Razif and Astrograph, and even Zaytan. Zaytan suffers from a starting position, not a Legendary Lord perspective. But the actual balancing and design and pacing of their campaigns does leave a lot to be desired. Maybe it will change with the cataclysmic events that they're going to add with the Lords of the End Times expansion for Nagash or DLC. But that remains to be determined. So there's pacing issues, but yes, certainly the design of Forge of Cast Dwarves is great. Just bear in mind the way the mid-game and late game works doesn't work very well with Cast Dwarves. They have a slow early game and then they dominate so hard in mid-late game. So it's like, yeah, it would be great to have more univariety early on when it matters, and less of a campaign. It's like, oh, you spend an entire campaign being able to unlock power that just makes you unstoppable, and you're already pretty strong to begin with. I would wish to use more Cast Dwarf units from the get-go, and I think the Conclave needs an entire redesign, and yes, Zaytan's campaign needs a redesign. Then we have the Champions of Chaos DLC. So, Champions of Chaos. The campaigns, except Festus, who is the best Plague campaign of Nurgle, and to some extent Valakia, the campaign's not really worth playing. Certainly not Village, and not Azazel, really. But, from value proposition, if you're playing any Demonic or Chaos faction, or the main factions, right, Demonic or Warriors of Chaos, this DLC is worth it. Adds a lot of content. It's a really good price for what it does. So the unit it unlocks, the heroes it unlocks, the lords it unlocks, adds a significant level of value. This DLC I would consider essential and really worth it if you're looking to play any Khorne campaign, Nurgle campaign, Slaaneshi campaign, or Tzeentch campaign. Can be Warriors of Chaos, can be the Champions of Chaos campaigns themselves, but it doesn't really matter what you're talking about. If you're playing any faction that can get the units from this DLC, it is very much worth getting this one. Then we have the Ogre Kingdoms DLC. So with Ogre Kingdoms, the unit roster is available through Omens of Destruction, but you get two better campaigns with Ogre Race Pack than you do with Omens of Destruction. Scrag and Greasers are just flat out better Legendary Lords to play their campaigns as than Maneater. Maneater has some fun systems, sure, but it's a kind of nothing campaign. Whereas Scrag and Greasers actually have, well, meat on the table. And no, that isn't exaggerated whatsoever. So with this race pack, what you're really getting is two campaigns that work quite well. Maybe a bit too well. There's, again, pacing issues, design issues, etc. And of course, you're not getting things that you wouldn't be able to unlock if you just purchased Omens of Destruction. But if you're looking to play Ogre, Scrag and Greases are just the campaigns to go for. Then we have Omens of Destruction. I'm just going to use Skulltaker. So with regards to Omens of Destruction, I would say it's a C tier DLC. Maybe even D or F to some extent. Okay, so let me explain. The campaigns of Omens of Destruction are not worth playing. Skulltaker's not worth playing. Gorbad's not worth playing, though he is worth confederating. So there is a difference between confederating a Lord because he's great in battle and has a good skill line. Gorbad certainly does so. As opposed to his campaign mechanics, which don't work. If you want to play a campaign in that area as the Greenskins play Skarsnik, he's a much better campaign. So the campaigns are not worth it. However, there are some really cool and useful things as part of Omens of Destruction. So what do you get as part of Omens of Destruction right here? You get lords, heroes, legendary heroes, and some really cool units like Wrathmongers, Colossal Squigs, all kinds of different things. Man-eaters, man-eaters, so to speak. All of those things are pretty cool. So the actual unit, lord, and hero content in this DLC is good. It's just the campaigns they designed that aren't so great. The reworks of Khorne, Ogres, and Greenskins are great. And yes, even Greenskins. Because yes, people complain about Greenskins not being able to recruit as much stuff. And they should have improved the WoW. But the Greenskins play significantly better from a unit variety. Like you have Big Guns and Black Orcs and Black Orc Big Bosses, hero recruitment, unit recruitment is just superior to what we had before. So reworks are great, units are great, heroes are great, it's just the campaigns are not worth it. If you're buying Omens of Destruction, you buy it for everything except the Legendary Lord campaigns. So that's the reason I'm going to put it in C tier. I mean, you could even consider it from a unit lord and hero perspective as an S tier DLC, but the campaigns themselves are a nothing burger. And that leaves Tides of Torment. Tides of Torment is an F tier DLC, and I'm not even going to joke on that subject with regards to that. So it could be considered the D tier, but not really. So let's consider Tides of Torment. Does it add important things for any of the races that are part of this DLC? Well, outside the Fimir and a couple of things for Norska, not really. For Slaanesh, you don't need it because Champions of Chaos offers you better value. The Legendary Hero, okay, fair enough. For High Elves, yeah, Caradhrian is a bit good, Skycutters, etc., but it's just so mediocre. I mean, you could really consider it D tier if you want to, but the campaigns are not worth it, the unique mechanics don't work, so I really don't think this DLC is worth it. And I think this is actually the worst selling DLC in not just Warhammer 3's history, but in Total War Warhammer series history. I'm not joking. I haven't actually looked at the data of that, but that might be the case. Now, of course, some people will argue, well, reviews don't represent sales. That's not how the industry works, I would like to point out. Because the industry works very differently, and yes, number of reviews and review scores do matter a significant amount in the industry. But I do not think Tides of Torment is worth it as a DLC. I think you can have a pretty good campaign experience as any of these races. Obviously, there's benefits, especially for High Elves, I would say. If you buy this one for Norska, I mean, Fimir Nobles, and that's pretty much it. I mean, Cursed Etten to some extent, if you care about that, but again. And as for Slaanesh, I guess Praetons, kinda. Except the Mask is a better Legendary Lord than the Kala. But that's, my perspective on the subject. I'm sure people will disagree. Then again, I think the figures are very indicative of where people stand on this. For the record, it is probably the best of the F tier DLCs, and maybe I could even swap Cast Warriors around, or swap with Elves around with this. But, and you know what? It might just be worth saying it. Could be D tier. I personally consider it F tier, but yeah, there's some value. Not really all that much, but there is some value, I suppose. And that's all I had to say. Christine, signing out. Stay tuned for more.